Joining from the NLP Logix AI Collaborate 2022 conference in Ponte Vedra, Florida, we have Kerri Stewart of Miller Electric Company.
So Kerri, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yeah, and we've got a lot to be able to unpack in terms of some of your own data science journey and some of the use cases that you've explored with the NLP Logix team and with your own company. I wanted to first open up with, if we could, Kerri, the business opportunity that arose that made data science and AI viable. It doesn't happen for everybody, and it certainly doesn't happen every day. What landed on your table that let you know what, we might need to unlock the value of data here?
One of our core values at Miller Electric is safety, and we want all of our employees to come home the same way they came to work each day. And what we noticed in an executive meeting was that our safety recordable injury rate was starting to creep up. What that means in lay terms is that people were getting hurt on job sites and not acceptable, right? And
Yep.
So what we knew is that we had a lot of data about these incidents. Some of them go all the way through risk management and insurance if there's a hospitalization or they have to go see a doctor. Lots of data points to take in. But what we recognized is we didn't have any insight into patterns. We didn't have any insight into any of the different silos of data collection. Data gets collected on the job site, data gets collected in the HR department, data gets collected by our risk management department, data gets collected at doctors' offices, data gets collected just about everywhere. And it's really good data, but it's all after the fact and it's all in silos.
Yeah.
So we knew that safety was becoming an issue, or we felt like it was. We needed to validate that. We knew we had a lot of data, but we knew we had no insight into that data.
Okay, got it. So, and when it comes to the data we're talking about, just for the context for the audience, I can imagine, not working in your environment specifically, I can imagine many different data points. There might be logs of who gets injured when and how, sitting around somewhere. Maybe they're coded in a specific way. Certain kinds of injuries are coded in a particular way. Maybe it's just written in open text. I have no idea. You're going to have to tell us. And then secondly, maybe there's some vision data out there. Maybe we've got cameras that can kind of showcase, who's driving the forklift that day or what's happening, on the floor that day or whatever the case may be. What are the sources of data that we needed more insight into just to help people kind of imagine?
Sure. An incident happens at the job site, and many times that the data about the accident, the incident itself, is a free-form text data that is either entered into an email or directly into a spreadsheet. And that data that's where the data journey starts, is at the job site. And it's typically a foreman or a superintendent who inputs the data, again, either into an email or into a spreadsheet. So a lot of free text data roaming around in that early stage. The data gets much cleaner and more formalized when it moves into software that's specifically meant to handle an incident as it goes through an insurance process. But on the front end, where the data is really rich and the data we really want to get to, it's free-form text data. And so it was all at the time housed in a spreadsheet in the HR department at Miller Electric.
Got it. Okay. So we do have different various and sundry sorts of data, but it sounds like a lot of the richness that we really can't quite sink our teeth into without AI is just a written note. Now, am I correct to presume that there might be different fields here, like person who got injured's name, Jeremy Stevens, and then nature of injury, and then it's just some open text. His knee hurts or something, and then there's some other field. What are the kinds of fields in this big open text document?
It would be name of the individual, it would be their employee ID number, it would be the date of the incident, the time of the incident, the location of the incident, and then, to your point, a very large cell that would have all of the data around the incident itself. If it were an insect bite, if it were a slip and fall, if someone bumped head, they got something in their eye, any number of things that can happen to a person on a job site. So all of that information was in one column. So where we were able to really sort the data on name, date of birth, employee ID. Some of those were very clear and easy to pull together. When it got to, again, the real meat of the data, what happened in this incident, it was free text form all in one column. So very hard to compare incidences because all of that data was contained. If it was a hand or an eye or a leg or a knee, it was all in that one cell.
Got it.
In a column.
Totally understood. Okay, so now we're starting to kind of tee up the problem, and we're going to get into where AI fits in. But just to sort of clarify for the folks tuned in, there's always multiple ways to skin a cat, and I can imagine some universe where there's a company similar to yours that says, hey, you know what? We need to make sense of our injury logs and our kind of, hurt on the job logs, and we're going to do that by creating a set of ontologies, just like they do for medical coding, for example, where, we can say the severity of the injury based on some scoring set, and we can do the part of the body that was injured and, all these various and sundry, we could score them manually. But there's also, I guess, challenges to doing that because building out such a system might become too limited, might become too ossified. You guys clearly made the choice, hey, we don't want to do that. We want to leverage AI to look at this open-ended sort of jumbled text. What was the choice that led you to say, hey, that's going to be a better choice for our company?
Well, what we knew is that we had to understand the data and we had to validate what we thought the data was telling us. So you have very seasoned individuals that work in the field, right? These are 10, 15, 20, 30, 40-year employees. So they will tell you, well, this is what causes accidents. It's with younger employees that have had less training, employees that have worked a lot of overtime. They might be tired. Employees that have been working on a project for a very long time and it's getting near the end of the project and they're trying to get things wrapped up. The weather might be bad. So all of these factors that foremen and superintendents, all the way up to the president of our company, think they know about what causes an accident. We had to validate that with real data. And so that was the first step for us, was to really understand the data that we've collected was all after the incident happened. What we wanted to know was, where do conditions exist based on all of the data that we know from the past? Where do conditions exist that an incident is most likely to happen? And what can we do about it?
Yeah, okay, got it. So this was sort of the first thing to achieve. I guess when it comes to outcomes, clearly reducing these instances of injuries is the desired outcome. But it sounds like what you've articulated right there was kind of a first checkpoint. You wanted that to be sort of a first tangible benefit from doing this analysis.
That's right.
Got it.
That's right. First, we needed buy-in from the executives all the way to the field personnel. We needed to take what they knew instinctually from decades in the industry and show them using their own data that their thoughts about what was happening on these job sites was valid. And then to get them to trust that the data, if they agreed with all that the data showed us, that they would then trust that the data could also say, hey, superintendent, hey, foreman, the conditions exist on this job site where we've got a whole bunch of 25-year-olds. They've been working overtime the last weeks. There's a snowstorm coming in next week, and we're really trying to wrap this project up. These are all data points that we know that we collect, but until an accident happens, we never go back and look at what all of those pieces of data were. So if we could get buy-in that the data will tell us where the conditions exist so that we could use an alert system, a red, yellow, green on a job site, to stand back and say, these conditions exist. Safety is a core value for Miller Electric. We need to step back and see what we can do to make sure that we don't have an incident based on what the data is telling us.
Got it. Okay. So this is helpful. And now this sort of leads us into the question around sort of how artificial intelligence was leveraged here. From an outside looking in perspective, it sounds like we've had to do some kind of NLP analysis of these big open-ended text blocks to figure out the type of the body, to figure out the type of situation and somehow classify, categorize, figure those things out. Talk to us a little bit about where you first started to leverage AI on some of these data sets and what that ended up looking like for the end users who are making important decisions here.
Sure. First was a lot of gathering of data from all of the different silos to understand what data we had, and then to understand where was the best, cleanest, and most valid data. And what we came around to was the payroll system. We knew that that data would be correct because that is how we pay our employees. That is how we bill our vendors. So because of those two key factors, we knew that the data from those systems would be the best and most relevant data for us to start to collect around. And then to pull that data in with the free text data and start to look for patterns. And again, what we found was that the best data, the most valid data, was our payroll and our AR and accounts payable systems, because that was for the revenue for the company and that was how employees got paid. That's where their birth dates were, so we knew how old they were.
Okay.
That's how we knew how many hours a week they had worked. So we knew if they had worked a lot of overtime, because that's how they got paid, right? So
Yep. So you had a source of truth.
We had a source of truth. So we were able to start to pull together what we now knew was and agreed upon by everyone from the field to the executive suite. These are the causes of incidences at Miller Electric. And where can we find the data ahead of time? And that source of truth for us, again, became our payroll system and our accounts payable and accounts receivable system.
Got it. Okay, so you found your source of truth that are very valuable kinds of data. You have these big logs that are giving you these instances of sort of what's happening and when. Now, this analysis has to turn into some kind of information, whether it be a real-time dashboard or a weekly report, that somebody's going to use to help make a safer environment for everybody by leveraging AI. What was the output? Did this end up turning into kind of a weekly analysis snapshot that we could use by kind of crawling through all these different sources and finding patterns? Did this become kind of a singular report that we were able to use to make some big changes in the company? Did it turn into something real time that was more dashboard-like? What was the output of this analysis, and how did it help to support decisions directly?
So the initial output was for our safety team. We have about 40 people, 40 employees that all they do all day is safety.
Got it.
So we initially created a dashboard for the safety team so that they could comb through the data as a part of their daily job to look at where incidents most likely to happen. And then they could deploy their resources either to the job site specifically, or they could reach out to the people running those job sites. So initially it was a dashboard for the safety team. We have now embedded a dashboard for each project, each job site into our Salesforce software platform. So each project has its own dashboard for all of the project deliverables, where the project is, where the billing is, labor hours, everything that you'd want to know about a project now has a tab for safety. And for that project specifically, we pull all of the data points from the different systems where we have agreed that is the source of truth, and we bring it right in to the Salesforce dashboard level at the project level, so that the project managers, the foremen, the superintendents have access to that data on a daily basis to be able to understand when criteria for a potential incident is starting to build on their projects specifically. So they don't have to sort through and look for anything. It's right there on their dashboard every morning when they come to look at project progress.
Got it. Okay, so they can kind of clock in and they can see. Now, we can reveal however much you kind of feel like is comfortable here, but what I'm imagining is on this dashboard, yes, like you said, there's all these different elements of the project deliverables, all of which are valuable, important, useful for us to understand. But there's also some elements of, are there project components that are potentially impending safety factors? In other words, are we, do we have a certain number of people with a certain low amount of, job experience? Do we have a certain amount of people working overtime? Do we have, it's probably more complex than that, because you certainly don't need AI to say how many people are working overtime in this project or the percent of people working overtime in this project. But is there anything you can give us insight into the kinds of insights that help these major project managers really better assess their kind of on-the-job decision making?
Yes, it is all of that. And it is as simple as pulling in a lot of the data that, again, for a project manager, for a foreman, for a superintendent that are working on one job site, that project manager probably has anywhere between 20 and 30 projects running at any time. And so it's really important for a red, yellow, green system. So at a glance, they can look at the dashboard, and it is a composite of all of the factors that go into the potential for an accident. And so, yes, what the dashboard does is it gives you a red, yellow, green. It gives you, it's not an alert yet. We're working on making it an actual alert. But right now, the person logged in looks at the dashboard and it's red, yellow, green. And if it's yellow or red, you dig deeper and you can click through to find out what is causing this project to be red. Is it the number of people on the job site? Is it the span of control? Is it too large of a span of control? Is it the number of young people on the job site? What is it? You can dig into the data. We use Tableau as the visualization tool, and as you probably know, Salesforce now owns Tableau, so it fits very nicely within the Salesforce platform for a visualization that is easy to understand very quickly if you've got a problem, and also very easy to drill down into the underlying components that make up that red, yellow, green system.
Okay. Yeah, this is great. So yeah, again, very, very important part of making AI actually come to life is to make it usable. It's one thing to analyze. It's another thing to allow people to make smarter decisions in a way that they actually care about. I would imagine if your project managers and safety people had to write all the Python code themselves, there wouldn't be very many smarter decisions happening. But if you can make a simple red, yellow, green, now we can pay attention to our reds and yellows and hopefully make smarter decisions along the way. That sounds like a very viable path to adoption there. In terms of the factors that roll in here, you mentioned the overtime and the level of experience. Maybe there's some, there's certainly plenty of secret sauce things that are probably unshareable here. But, if we think about, were there any factors that bubbled up from the data that were kind of surprising, where you're like, okay, actually, this is something we really want to keep our eye on, this random quantifiable thing that we weren't really seeing as correlative to safety? Like, were there any other factors than just how much sleep have these people gotten and how long have they been on the darn job? I mean, I presume there's some other ingredients here.
What's great about it, Dan, is that there were no surprises. And I think that's how we got buy-in from the field to the executive team, right? There was nothing revelatory. And I actually would say the initial validation data study kind of fell like a thud on the desk of the executive team. It was sort of like, well, no kidding, Kerri. This is exactly what causes incidents. We know this. We've been doing this for 100 years. We know this. So I think the fact that there were no surprises in that initial data gathering exercise and validating exercise was what helped us get buy-in to move forward with the AI project. So nothing surprising actually made it more valuable in terms of buy-in for everybody that needed to use the tool. If we were going to build it, if we were going to build out a dashboard, we had to have buy-in. And as you know, from a change management perspective, if you don't have buy-in from the very beginning,
no way.
Projects don't get completed, or they get completed, they go on a shelf, no one uses it, it's not of any value. And then in the work that we try to do, you lose buy-in, you lose credibility. So for us, not having any surprises in that initial work was incredibly valuable for attaining buy-in at the end.
Yeah, and so that makes a ton of sense. And you're bringing up a really important point about change management in terms of, do we have the people on the floor who are closest to the problem? Do they feel like this is representative of their expertise? Do they feel like this is intimidating and threatening to them, or do they feel like this is an ally and it's a validation of their experience? And we really do have to play very tactfully to people's little human needs there in order to see these things through. I could definitely see a world, Kerri, and I won't lie about it, I can definitely see a world where there were multiple strands of data, that there's, this happens in literally every conceivable industry, right? So you take like the diagnosis of cancer and for an analyzing biopsies from some kind of cancerous tumor. And if we run enough analyses with enough algorithms, we may actually come up with commonalities and early signals that the PhDs didn't find. And to be honest, that's pretty valuable because now we're figuring out things that maybe even go beyond our current expertise to coax out patterns. So I can actually see extreme value in finding things that human experts could not find. But I guess to your point, at least in terms of early adoption, number one, well, there were no really outlier patterns. But number two, it probably helped your cause to get buy-in by saying, hey, this is kind of what you folks already know is true. This is just a tool to support your existing amazing instincts. And it sounds like that really helped you out.
That's 100% correct. There would have been huge value if there was an aha moment in this, to your point, that we could go, wow, we didn't know that. And now we can change the way we do things so that we can ensure that that never happens on a job site.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, I think the opposite was good for us, at least in our industry and in terms of adoption. Because you were right, that human factor of, I don't need a dashboard to tell me when a job site's not safe.
Yeah.
Right? Because that their job is to make sure that their teams are safe, that they are safe, that the job site is safe, that our subcontractors are safe, right? That's their job, part of their job. What we got to in the very end was this is a tool to help you know before an incident happens that all of these conditions exist so that you're not filling out a report afterwards, filling in all of the information, that your dashboard is going to tell you this exists today.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think it's an important lesson for the listeners around their own adoption journey. And this takes us a bit here, Kerri, to our last question, which is around where you see some of this transformation headed into the future. Safety is a core value. There's many important facets of the business. Obviously, safety is one of them. You've gotten a better understanding of your data. You now have turned it into something that people can use to steer decision making. This is all part of a journey of kind of leveraging and making better use of and being more productive thanks to our data. Where do you see this kind of carrying forward for you guys? What are the capabilities you're excited to build and the use cases you're excited to blossom into as you develop sort of the in-house AI skills there?
Well, with this particular project still ongoing, I mentioned a little bit earlier that we're looking for an alert system, something that will automatically, a person now does not have to go to the dashboard. There is an alert that will come up, on their homepage, or it will send a text or an alert to the appropriate party. But to get to that, right now, a lot of the data that we're pulling into the model, as valid as it is and as clean as it is, we know there are more factors that play into an incident happening on a job site. So for us and our safety team at Miller Electric, the next step is to understand where we can get consistent, valid other pieces of data to add to this model to make it stronger. Now that we've got buy-in from the people that are using the model, we now want to add more to the model. We want to make the model stronger. And so part of that has been purchasing and implementing better software that allows for very little variation for bad spelling, for too much free text. You alluded to it earlier. These systems that it's a drop down. It's hand, it's neck, it's eye, it's
there
leg.
We go. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And so that we can get better data that we want that can make the model better. And then from there, working with NLP, once we get better data going in, the better model to predict where conditions exist for an incident to happen, but to look for other insights in the data that can help us with claims management. Is there a specific physician or care provider that we probably shouldn't be sending our employees to? Is there anything else we can do to reduce accidents? But now let's go further in. If an incident has happened, what can we do to have the best outcome possible for that employee and then for Miller from a risk management perspective?
Yeah. Okay. So going full cycle with this sort of safety process where, yes, we can detect and reduce the risks, but then we can look on the back end to their insurance provider, the place they get treatment, the outcomes from that treatment over time, and then help us guide these people towards the providers that are going to serve them and reduce our risk in the best way. So making more of a complete system, Kerri, am I kind of hearing you correctly?
That's correct.
Okay, cool. So there's kind of two trajectories of progress that you guys are headed into that I think I'm trying to wrap my head around. One of them is refining and improving the system you have now. So making your red, yellow, greens really, really strong, really powerful. Part of that is going to involve software that can, medically code, as I sort of use the rough analogy, these kind of instances so that we have less variance and we have a higher kind of fidelity to really representing risks properly and injuries properly. So that's data inputs, data infra systems. That's one level of level up. So make this red, yellow, green better. And then the second is going to be, let's eventually find a way to handle the whole life cycle of this injury event to make sure that we can produce the best outcome for our employees.
That's exactly right.
Cool. All right. So yeah, this is hopefully useful for the folks who are tuned in here today, sort of getting to see the vision of what was the initial opportunity that spurned the desire to start to leverage data. What were the initial use case and what is the path forward? I think, Kerri, you're blazing a trail in the safety world that a lot of other companies are going to be following. And I hope that a lot of people today were able to learn from this episode. I know that's all we have for time, but thank you so much for being able to be with us.
Thank you so much, Dan.
For more in this series, visit nlplogix.com. That's Logix with an X.